Hi, I'm Dr. Meg. I've worked as an independent college counselor for many, many years. I've been the sort of person families hire to help their kids get into Harvard and Stanford and Brown and University of Chicago, and I've been very successful in that. But today, I'm going to try to talk your family out of applying to Harvard. That is, if you've got a kid whose heart is set on the Ivies or Stanford, something like that, I'm going to do my best to talk you out of it. I'm doing this for a lot of reasons. It's not that I don't like those schools. I went to Stanford. I had my heart set on it. I just think that it's not for everyone. In fact, it's not for most people. So if you and your student listen to this video and by the end I have not talked you out of it, then I'll probably be okay with you applying there. Stay tuned. Also, make sure to sign up for my free guide, my top 10 tips for massively reducing stress in the college admissions process. That's my free guide and the link is below. Okay, so here's my first thought experiment. This is my own invention and I'm very proud of it. I want you and your kid to imagine the top 5 ranked students at your kid's high school in their class, okay? So these are the highest achieving, highest GPA kids. Now, no judgment, I was one of these kids. So, picture them in your mind and then multiply them and imagine an entire college full of those kids, full of that kind of personality. Tends to be a certain type, right? Very driven, maybe a little bit tense, very, very busy. And so just imagine that. And I think a lot of students think, oh, I'm going to go to a place like Harvard and it's going to be a whole wide range of people. And that's true to some extent. It's also going to be a certain type over and over and over again. And the vibe of the school is going to have that energy. Now, a place like Stanford, everyone's going to be pretending to have fun, but there's still going to be a real intensity to it. The old adage about Stanford is the duck, right? They're paddling like mad under the water and they're pretending to be calm on the surface. Every school has its different vibe, but I really want students to think about that. What is it going to be like to spend 4 years, 5 years of their lives in a place like that? Is that going to be a good fit? So my second point relates to the first. As admissions rates drop precipitously, now, schools like Stanford and Brown are accepting like 3%. My theory, backed by a lot of anecdotal evidence, is that personality diversity has gone down. So I'll just give you an example. My husband went to Stanford a few years before me, and I've met his friends. By the time I got to Stanford was accepting 14.5% of students, okay? So there was a certain type of student there that was sort of dying off. I was actually one of them. Those were the wild creative types. People were starting to think are you lost? You don't seem to belong here. I am thoroughly convinced my type would not get in 10 years later when my cousin went, and certainly not now. So I think what happens as rates drop is that schools can really only start to accept the highest achieving, busiest of the bunch. And those are going to tend to be sort of more workaholic types. And so my theory is that these places have less of a mix of personalities. There might still be people from all over the world with really interesting life experiences, but I really think that some of the magic of college is meeting people you would never meet before who have wildly different personalities than you. My concern is that that's starting to sort of go down at the top schools. Also, because of practices like early decision, economic diversity is also becoming a thing of the past at these places, sadly. Now, that doesn't mean that these schools aren't going to accept some scholarship kids, but if a school is getting a huge part of their student body from early decision, that group is going to be mainly really affluent students. And that's also going to change the energy of the school. So the third thing I want families to consider is what happens when you get a bunch of students who really feel like they have to be happy because they were one of the select few that got into a place like Harvard or Stanford. I have found this to be true, that these students often don't feel that they could admit that they're unhappy because they need to be grateful. We have a phrase for this. It's called toxic positivity. And it can be very prevalent in the student body at places like the Ivies. So I want families to think about that. What would it be like for their kid to be in a place of a lot of toxic positivity, buried depression? Depression is pretty rampant on college campuses all over the place. But at these top schools, I think you get a variety of depression that can be very upsetting and unnerving because it's mostly buried. So my fourth point is that if your kid is set on an Ivy, they're probably a big fish in their school, right? That means they get a lot of attention, they get a lot of praise, and they're sort of just wired that way for ambition and achievement. And no judgment here. I am that way. I was that way. My kid is that way. So it's not bad. It doesn't mean like, someone pressured us. Some people are just kind of built that way, especially in high school. But I want you to think about if your student goes to a place where everything they're good at, someone is better at it. What happens to that kid then? It can be very disorienting. When I went to Stanford, I was no longer the best violinist around. I was no longer the best student around. I was definitely not the best at math, which I had been. And it was really hard for me. I had a lot of ego death. Now, when some people will say, well, isn't ego death good? Isn't it good to get over yourself? Yes and no. I think that certainly you want to dismantle that by the time you're in midlife, but I'm not sure it's healthy to dismantle it when you're 18 or 19. For me, it was really hard, and I just sort of got lost, and it was sort of like I lost my fuel and was unmoored and started getting B's, which for me was a sign of incredible distress. All right, here's my fifth point, and it's one I make a lot in my resources, which is that momentum is more important than achievement. What do I mean by that? I mean that some of the most accomplished academics I have ever met kind of started off slowly. And that can be not only an acceptable path, it might be a better one. I met a lot of people at Stanford who kind of burned out academically really early on, and that was sad. They didn't go to grad school. They kind of chose something safe to do with their work because they had used up a lot of their energy. And the point I just made about becoming unmoored when you're not the best anymore, there's really something to be said for staying in an environment where you're really being nurtured, you're being recognized as special, and people really care about your accomplishments and what you're doing. That can be a really important part of growing up for kids who are really ambitious. So I know that it seems like, oh my goodness, how exciting would it be? There's all these videos online of people getting accepted and getting to wear the sweatshirt of this magical school. And I find this to be so dangerous and toxic because I think it detracts from the fact that, if a kid has their heart set on Harvard, they can go there for grad school. They can go there for a doctorate. They can go to a good state school and excel and totally make it wherever they want to be. There's always an option to get there. But being in a rush, I think, can sometimes detract from a natural maturing process that is happening for students. And so I hope that I have convinced you, if not to not apply to these schools, to really be in choice and to know that there are real trade-offs at these places. That yes, there is a feast of learning to be had. There is really something to be said for, glorious institutions of higher learning. And there are many, many options for kids who are really driven. And getting accepted to a top school doesn't actually have to be the way that they end up at that school. If you found this useful, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and sign up for my free guide, my top 10 tips for reducing stress in college admissions. The link should be below, and that'll sign you up for my newsletter as well. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Meg.